Welcome to the return of the Primal Endurance Podcast. This is your host, Brad Kearns, and we are going on a journey to a kinder, gentler, smarter, more fun, more effective way to train for ambitious endurance goals. Visit primalendurance.fit to join the community and enroll in our free video course. Hey listeners, I'm so pleased to introduce my conversation from years ago, 2016, with Zach Bitter. And what's so cool about that is that he was just getting going back then. He took off from his substitute teacher gig in Sacramento, California, to meet me in person up at the finish line of the Western States 100-mile run in Auburn. He'd already had some great performances back then. He was getting known as a fat-adapted, keto-adapted endurance athlete, so he was one of the early pioneers in that area in the ultra running scene, along with two-time Western States champion Timothy Olson. But Zach was just getting on the map, dreaming of a professional career in ultra marathon running, which really didn't exist back then. But look what's happened to this athlete's career progression. It's absolutely been astonishing. And with the progression of his own career, we have seen an incredible progression in the popularity and the sophistication of ultra running as a sport. So that's great for the leading athletes like Zach, because now he's able to make a legitimate full-time career out of it, which he deserves to, training at that level. I mean, these guys are training as hard or on a par with any other athlete in any sport in the history of sports. I mean, you cannot believe the training load in an impact sport like running. The Tour de France guys certainly train hard and are on the bike all day, but running 120, 130, 140 miles per week, week in and week out, and then competing at the 100-mile competition level, or even those 200-mile longer crazy events, it's pretty amazing. The great thing about Zach is he's very knowledgeable, informed, well-spoken. He's a true enthusiast of peak performance in every way, and he has a great podcast. So I strongly encourage you to go over there and listen to the great content that he puts out on the Human Performance Outliers podcast. But to get a sense of the level that he's performed at over the years as he's progressed with his career, he set the world record in the 100-mile run. This is on an indoor track, running laps and laps on an indoor track. He clocked a time of 11 hours and 40 minutes to run 100 miles. That is an average pace per mile of 6:48. I want you to go out on your next run. You could put your smartwatch on or go to the track and run 4 laps and get a sense of what it feels like to run a 6:48. If you can even run a 6:48, how about a 3:24 for half a mile? It's moving, it's clicking along. And he did that for 100 miles. He also set an amazing world record of 100 miles on a treadmill in 12 hours and 18 minutes. Imagine running on a treadmill. Next time you complain about your boring workout because you had to hit the treadmill for 40 minutes because it was icy and snowing outside, think about Zach not only staying on the belt for 12 hours, but running just over 7 minutes per mile over and over and over. Absolutely phenomenal endurance machine. So we get to hear from him about his background, his philosophy about training, and you're going to learn a lot from this guy. One takeaway that I had from him in a recent conversation when we were talking about the popularity of the minimalist shoe movement. I've been such a big fan for so many years, but he had a great insight that I've implemented into my own training, which was that he's a big fan of minimalist shoes as well, but he likes to rotate in cushy shoes now and then to give his feet a break and kind of transfer the impact load in a different manner when you're wearing the puffy shoes. And so I went out and got myself the puffiest possible shoes I could find, and I used those for my 13-hour hike on the Cactus to Clouds route in Palm Springs. It was a 22-mile epic adventure that lasted all day, starting at 3:30 in the morning. And my feet felt great, and I suspect if I had been wearing Vibrams, I probably could have done it because I'm well adapted. I've been wearing them for years, but who knows what my feet might have felt like at the end. And so I've had a recent practice of doing mostly minimalist footwear with my workouts, with my everyday life, And then on occasion, especially when my feet feel beat up the day after a high jump workout or a sprint workout, I will slip on the pillow shoes and with a big smile and not feel embarrassed or that I'm departing from my strong commitment to the barefoot and the minimalist shoe lifestyle. And that's just a great little tidbit that I got from Zach. Much more to come. Here he is, Zach Bitter, old school Zach Bitter. Host Brad Kearns here in Auburn, California, at the finish line, near the finish line of the Western States 100 trail running capital. Thanks for joining us in Auburn. It is Zach Bitter, the fat burning beast himself.
Well, thanks for having me, Brad. It's been a pleasure to follow you guys online and now be on the show.
Coming alive from the pages of the book Primal Endurance. And I think the intriguing thing, if you read in chapter 4 about the faster study and how you came out burning an incredible percentage of fat, an incredible rate of fat burning per minute that was beyond what was previously believed to be the human limit. So why don't we start there and tell us about this experience with the faster study and what they were studying and how it came out.
Yeah, so I think the big goal of the faster study was to find out like what is the difference in your energy oxidation rates between carbohydrates and fats in well-trained endurance athletes. So folks who would have already maximized the amount of fat metabolizing rate they could achieve through a training stimulus. So now we wanted to add to that, what on top of that does diet do? So we had a group of high carbohydrate athletes and a group of high fat athletes as well, and we paired them up to kind of test these differences. And I think
So this is the high carb diet. So they've reported they're eating high carb for a long time. And then you have these reported high fat eaters for a long time. So they're coming into the study totally disparate the way they're getting to the finish line. But they were equal ability. These were all elite level people, right?
Yeah. They basically looked at the ultra running community and tried to find willing participants that had won events and finished high level at some of these events and
wants to run for 3 hours straight on a treadmill.
Yeah. So they basically collected a bunch of data between muscle biopsies, fat biopsies, blood draws. We put on the oxygen mask thing during the treadmill session, as well as the VO2 max test, and gathered all the information on like rates of fat metabolization during these events. And the thing they discovered that I think is most interesting to people is that folks who are eating a high-fat diet are able to metabolize much higher rates of fat during varying intensity levels throughout the course of a race or a training program. So it's a really eye-opening piece of information that we can use to take to the training table and kind of decide like what can I do outside of just the act of running or competing in order to improve myself along the way.
So I guess we'll get to the study in a sec, but it seems like the overall goal is if you can get better and better at burning fat, you're going to need less ingested calories. And it sounds like from stuff we talked about off camera, you're also noticing improvements in recovery and all these kind of things.
Yeah. So I think it's definitely twofold. You're in the event and then after the event and in the workout and after the workout and stuff like that. And from what I've noticed, from the faster study is that, my rate of fat metabolization, which I think peaked at 1.56 grams per minute, which is double average, and 50% higher than what they used to think was the highest you could possibly get. And I wasn't even the highest burning one there. There was guys who did higher than that. And just knowing that like you can manipulate that with your diet certainly puts you in a position to not have to ingest as much during a race. So you're not diverting as much blood to digestion during an event if you're not eating as much. And being able to kind of rely on that energy source that you have relatively unlimited supply of, which is your body fat storage.
So you're burning 1.5 grams of fat per minute. That's 14 calories.
Yep.
That's 600. That's 800 or 900 calories per hour of fat. So basically, a 900 calorie per hour effort is that's pretty aggressive.
Sure.
So in other words, you don't need carbohydrate.
Yeah.
Pretty much. Even going fast. You talked on your blog, zachbitter.com, in detail about what you consumed during the National 100K Championship where you're running 6:30 miles for hours and hours and hours, and you were throwing down, what did I see in there? Mountain Dew and this and that, and one Oreo cookie. It's very good. Go read it, people. But you're topping off the tank when you're going full gas. But when you're in the lab running a comfortable pace, you're essentially what we talk about as a fat-burning beast. You can go on. And you also told me off camera about your Western States pacing experience where how far was that, and how much did you eat along the way?
Yeah, so I always run these little tests on myself because I like to think that I've got an open mind and want to try different things on myself, and I see that I'm an individual, so I need to try it on myself as opposed to say, oh, it worked for them, I must work for me, kind of a thing. And when I paced a friend at Western States for the last 38 miles, I wanted to see how good would I feel when I was just taking in water and electrolytes, and it was about 8.5 hours out there. And, I basically took in nothing but water and electrolytes. I grabbed a handful of fruit at an aid station one time. And other than that, it was, it was just, we were just moving through, and I didn't feel really any difference at that low intensity. And, so it's just one of those things where you go out and you kind of see your level of fat adaptation, in real time, as opposed to in a lab. Because, the interesting thing too is you look at a pace. So at Mad City, my pace held consistent, or my pace held consistent at the faster study. You're not deviating. You're not burning any matches, so to speak, by doing a fast surge and then backing off or anything like that. Where in a race, you might, especially if it's a hilly course, where you're going to power up a hill and you might go anaerobic for a bit and then have to try to come back down, So being able to see that fat adaptation kind of work even in the real live environment is always kind of nice to kind of quantify what you're doing.
So if you can go 38 miles over extreme hill canyons, heat, with no calories, you're pretty much fat adapted, would you say?
Yeah.
That's a good measuring stick. Maybe, how about sitting at your desk and going without calories for 8.5 hours? Is still a challenge for many people.
For sure, yeah. People bonk at work every day.
Every day. That's why there's vending machines and napping areas. Yes, napping pods like at Google.
Right, and I think that's the most intriguing thing for a lot of people about the lifestyle is that you have this steady supply of energy that you can rely on. And when you're sitting at a desk or moving very little, your demands for a high octane source of fuel like carbohydrates are non-existent. So if you can train your body to be able to tap into that, then you're doing yourself a lot of favors in terms of not having that 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I need another cup of coffee or I need to take a nap or something like that. You've got that steady stream of energy throughout the day.
Let's go back to your beginnings in the ultra scene, where you were carbohydrate fueled just like everybody else and going for, what was your guideline for racing? How many calories were you putting in? What were you using? And then what did you notice?
Yeah, I was always aiming for 300 to 400 calories an hour, and I felt like I did better on the high end, so I would always try to hit 400. And basically that was I looked at the literature and it's that's what you can handle. Any more than that your body can't process, and I felt any less than that I'm leaving something on the table, so to speak. So that's kind of what I aimed at. And I guess I never had a huge issue with digestion on the course, so I just pounded it. It sat all right.
What were you consuming?
Everything, any sports drink, soda, things like that, gels, all kinds of stuff like that. I've since moved to what I think is a higher product fuel and X endurance, but at that time it was just whatever was high sugar, super quick energy source type of thing. And what I noticed was I didn't have trouble. Most people figure out they need to make a change because they find themselves at the end of the race puking or going to the bathroom a bunch of times, but I didn't really have that experience. My experience was more so in day-to-day life. I noticed my recovery was slowing down. I was getting inflammation and swelling in my ankles and waking up at night and things like that. So I knew something wasn't sustainable. And
so you're feeling these symptoms, and you're also hitting it hard, and you're doing crazy ultra schedule like a lot of the elites do.
Yep.
So when did you think, hey, maybe I should fool around with my diet?
So it was probably in 2011, I did 350 milers in 9 weeks. And and that was on top of my 100+ mile a week training programs and things like that. So I was definitely starting to feel it and kind of notice some of those abnormalities, I guess, outside of the actual training. And that's when I decided, do I need to scale back the training and racing to make this sustainable, or is there something else I can do? And, I really loved that lifestyle, so I didn't really want to scale back much if I didn't have to. And so I looked at nutrition first. And, before that, my mindset was basically, I'm out there burning 2-3 times my resting metabolic rate on some of these higher training days. So I just, supplemented that additional calorie source with high levels of carbohydrate. So what I basically did is I took a large chunk of that carbohydrate fuel source and replaced it with dietary fat. And I right away started to notice a lot of those symptoms going away, like the swelling, the prolonged recovery periods, the waking up at night type of thing. That all kind of went away pretty quick. And then, within about 4 weeks or so, I started noticing that the switch in energy, the switch in fat as fuel as opposed to carbohydrate as fuel during training wasn't impacting me in a negative way in terms of slowing me down or anything like that. So there's definitely a transition period, but after about a month or so, a little less than a month, it was pretty much smooth sailing.
Okay, so you battled through that transition period. Are you slowing your training down to make sure that's going hand in hand with your transition to a high-fat diet?
Yeah, I think a lot of people do better by not doing much training at all during that phase, because you want to induce as little stress as possible during that phase. So that metabolic switch is going to happen much quicker in a stress-free environment. So, I definitely was at a point where my season was over. I didn't need to do any speed work or anything like that. I was, doing some easy running and stuff like that. So I was running every day, I think, or most days, but at a very casual rate. And, what I noticed is in those 2 to 4 weeks or so when I first started, there were a couple days where I'd feel really, really, really low on energy. I'd go out for a run and I'd feel like I was running a lot harder and my pace was actually slower than what I normally would do an easy run at. And, after about 2 to 4 weeks of that though, it wasn't every day. It was maybe 3 days out of the week I'd have a day like that. And then, but after about 2 to 4 weeks, it flipped over and every day was pretty consistent. My easy pace was back to where it normally was. And, the only difference was instead of eating copious amounts of carbohydrate, I was supplementing my meals and snacks with higher fat sources of food.
Okay, so you're increasing your fat intake at the same time you're trying to cut carbs, which I would assume make it a lot easier. You're not hungry and walking around thinking about a pint of ice cream.
Yeah, it's when you're training hard on a high carb diet, I feel like you're thinking about food and eating all day long. And you're always kind of hungry. And you always I remember, I've talked to other guys who've made a similar switch to me. It's like, you remember these times where you do a huge training block and you're full, your stomach is physically full, but you're still getting hunger pangs, which is just a miserable place to be. Cause I don't want to put anything else down my throat. But you get these hunger pangs still. So that type of thing is gone. You literally can metabolize body fat or dietary fat, which is much lower in volume too, which I like because if I'm doing a 2-a-day training block, I don't want to have a full stomach going into that last training. But if I'm doing high level training, I don't want to be skipping meals either. So having that empty stomach feeling is always kind of nice for a workout for sure, or even just an easy long run or something like that.
Okay, so then you get into the race situation, and as you detail on your blog, you're fine-tuning, especially when you're going at a fast pace with whatever carb intake you feel you need. How's that strategy work?
It's basically what I did is, rather than zoning in on this 400 calories an hour, what I used to do, I've bumped that back way lower to, closer to 100 to 200 calories an hour.
This is going full bore national championships, running 630 miles all day long. So even that it's very few calories, but you're probably a guy who needs more calories than anyone behind you in the field because you're running close, you're running the faster pace.
Right. Yeah. So, it's one of those things where I look at the numbers in the lab and I feel like I probably need less than I actually do. But then on the other hand, it's one of those things where I'm not doing a whole lot of negatives to go from 100 to 150. I think I'd be doing some negatives if I went from 100 to 400. That's just adding way too much extra oxidative stress from the carbohydrate and digestive type processes. So for me, it's I err a little bit on the side of caution. and I just try to trickle in carbohydrates really slowly throughout the course of the day at a very low rate. And like at Mad City, like you're describing, it was somewhere around 150 calories an hour is what felt right and felt comfortable, and even energy levels all day kind of thing.
So you bring up another point when you said the oxidative stress from consuming the carbohydrate.
Yeah.
So we have these guys, let's say, that came in the faster study. These are top performing guys. They're winning races. They're wearing olive wreaths on their head. They're champs. But down the line, and Maffetone talks about this too, is like, let's see how long their career will last. Let's see how often they get injured, sick, burnt out. And so it seems like you can make it work slamming those carbs if you're lucky and you don't have those stomach problems that are leaving you on the sideline. But like you report, you didn't have the massive digestive difficulties, but you noticed the swollen ankles and waking up at night and these little things that were indicative of an overly stressful, as you say, unsustainable lifestyle.
Yeah. And that's a study that's less talked about too. They did a study on oxidative stress at Western States in 2012. That was kind of the precursor to the faster study, and I think this study actually was what ultimately got like interest in the faster study getting its funding and getting its ability to be put on and stuff. And what it was they were looking at the oxidative stress of ultra runners who were taking a high fat diet route or a high carb route. And it was just like the rates of fat oxidation. It was like mind-boggling how much of a range it was. Like,
oh, really?
Some of the high-fat athletes came back and like they didn't look like there was a whole lot of oxidative stress at all, really. And then the high-carb folks, it looked like there was just some like real horrible things going on.
So they're actually drawing blood during the race, or urine, and looking at.
I'm trying to think if they did blood. I can't remember if they did. I don't think they did blood during the race. They did like saliva swabs, though.
Okay.
So they did some blood draws before and after, though, too, just to kind of get some baseline markers.
Wow.
And then, they didn't want to interfere too much with the event or the participants in the event. And they probably would have had a hard sell trying to get people to do blood draws in the middle of what some people would consider a chance of a lifetime to run Western States. So they did the saliva swabs during, and then I think for like 7 days after, you kept saliva swabbing and sealing them, freezing them, mailing them in. Dr. Volek and Dr. Finney were the ones who headed that up, and it was pretty impressive to see the oxidative stress difference, which goes right into the recovery phase. Like if you generate tons of oxidative stress during an event, it's going to take you longer to bounce back and be ready for another go. Whereas if you limit that, you feel like you get stronger after it almost. It's just quicker. And you look at like the inflammation factor of metabolizing a carbohydrate compared to metabolizing a fat, and that's hugely different too. So it would stand to reason that for me, my inflammation would go down and my swelling would go down when I'm not generating those high inflammatory oxidative stress type responses from fueling the majority of my workouts with carbohydrates.
Well, you have the recovery factor, and then you also have the life factor and the aging factor.
Yeah.
And we detailed this in the book that if you're training in a chronic pattern and consuming that high carbohydrate dependency eating pattern, you are literally accelerating the aging process due to your pursuits of endurance sports, which are seemingly healthy, and you have fit-looking people on the starting line. But we now know that they're not immune from cardiovascular damage, heart disease risk, and also just the breakdown and the burnout from doing something it's inherently stressful to go 100 miles, and then you're throwing sugar on top of it.
Yeah, you're already doing something that is relatively like non-typical for the human body. I think the human body is definitely designed to run long distances at slow rates. But 100 miles is probably stretching your luck a little. There's not a whole lot of like reason to really do a hard 100 miles in any scenario. So when you're taking something that's already probably tempting fate a little bit, and then topping it off with something that's going to just exacerbate the problem. It's like kind of want to try to eliminate as many of those as you can.
And this is great from Finney and Volek's work, The Art and Science of Low Carbohydrate Living and Performance, detailing that the science is showing when you're in that ketogenic state, to make an extreme example of really restricting the dietary carbs, it has a potent anti-inflammatory effect. Known to be at the level of the most powerful drugs.
Yeah. It's pretty crazy, the difference. And I've had some blood work done when I'm in like a low carb phase of training, like a really low like ketosis level, and my inflammation markers are incredibly low. Like,
and you're in the middle of a 100-mile training week and the whole thing.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's crazy.
I've had a couple where like I've come off like a huge training block where it's like where it would almost simulate like doing a race to some degree. So you would think that's when those inflammatory markers would be the highest, and like, they're still like really low as long as I've got those carbs down at during the recovery phase.
So what's your routine like? Are you making a concerted effort to get in that ketogenic state, getting your carbs under 50 or 75 grams a day, or do you go back and forth?
Yeah, I definitely range a bit depending on what I'm doing. When I'm in my high intensity, high volume training phases, I'm definitely bringing the carbohydrates back for no other reason than to seek better performance. If I were looking at it from a health standpoint, I wouldn't do that. But then I'm always trying to kind of put a check on that process.
That's so funny what he just said, because the opposite has been said so many times. Like, I up the carbs for no other reason but for better performance. And now this guy is saying he's lowering the carbs to better performance, and he's winning national championships. So let's pause for a commercial for Zach Bitter himself at ZachBitter.com, setting us straight and getting rid of those carbs to improve your performance.
Yeah. It's
mind-blowing because it's changing all the parameters that we've previously thought about, which was, I guess, essentially how good are you at sparing glycogen or slamming down gels in order to stay with the pack in front of you.
Yeah, and you're walking that fine line both during the race. Like, my gut gonna fail me, or am I gonna have to stop like 20 times?
Is this gonna be my lucky day?
Right. Yeah. So you're always kind of walking that fine line when you're depending on that high level of fuel intake during a race, and that's just looking at it on the surface too. If it gets hot out, it makes it even harder. Like, your body gets even worse at being able to stomach things. That's where you see a lot of people's stomach turns are on these hotter races where they go through like the canyons at Western States, and that's where you can see some people kind of fall apart too, because either they continue to try to fuel and they end up puking it back up, or they realize they can't fuel anymore, and then they're trying to slog through the canyons on a body
all of a sudden become fat adapted.
Yeah.
I'm going to become fat adapted at mile 45 at Devil's Thumb and see if I can hang.
Right.
Good luck.
Mm-hmm. And that's where it gets tricky. And, I guess one of the biggest questions I always get is like, well, what about the elite 5K, 10K guys, and why aren't they doing this, or where does this fall for them? And, I think, they're definitely going to have a little different ratios during their intensity phases and things than I do. And, but they can still have a fat adapted like mind frame. They can still spend their recovery and spend their easy times or base building phases in a fat adapted state to kind of put that framework in place, and then bring the carbs back the same way I do, for these faster events, and then still reap the benefits of not accelerating the aging process, or the like inflammation factors, or the like if they're in a similar scenario to where I was, like the swelling and things like that, and speed up the recovery. So like it's interesting. It's you're always looking at the lifestyle and like where is the low. For me, it's always like, what's the lifestyle and what's the lowest I can drop my carbs in that lifestyle to still maximize performance without sacrificing fat adaptation.
So let's say you're doing some of the higher intensity training, you're pointing for a shorter race or whatever. I don't know if a shorter race is a marathon for you or something, but I imagine there's times. How do you do it? Are you doing it before your glycolytic workouts? Are you doing it to recover after? And what kind of carbs are you choosing when you're upping the carbs from your normal baseline?
Yeah, so a lot of times it's just, if I have a big block coming up, I'll really, like maybe a day or so or 2 days before, I'll start kind of like inching it up a little bit, the carb intake a little bit. And then I'll try to be pretty strategic about using it during it as well, where I'm not like snacking on high levels of carbohydrate when they're gonna be like heavy insulin responses for it. So like kind of that before, during, and after type of mentality. Once I get into the hard training block is usually a pretty good time frame to aim for. For me, I aim for mostly like what you consider low glycemic carbohydrate sources. like sweet potatoes, melons, berries, things that aren't going to generate a huge like insulin response in my body. So those are kind of the ones I'll turn to. Some of those like water-based fruit sources that are much less super concentrate sugar, and then like some of those slower insulin response type carbohydrates, like maybe raw honey or like the sweet potato type.
So we had this amazing results from the FASTER study. We had the fat-adapted group and the high carbohydrate eating control group. Did these guys go home and start Googling stuff? Yeah. And is there been a change in I guess in the trends in the ultra scene toward fat adaptation?
I think there's definitely been a trend moving, like a higher percentage moving over, at least experimenting with it. It's always interesting because there's so much information to be learned. So you run the risk of kind of being like knowing just enough to kind of get yourself into trouble, or you can kind of do it right and kind of see the benefits of it. So you're walking a fine line there. You definitely get people who try to skirt the process and kind of do a not so good job of it, and then you end up hearing about them and how it failed for them and stuff. But
so what would that look like? Is it someone who's maybe not doing such a good job cutting carbs, and so they're in this wavering zone where they're not getting enough to refuel like they did in the old days, but still not good enough to be fat adapted? Yeah,
I mean, I see people not let it take hold. Like is one big thing. They don't give it that month or so to kind of like. They don't treat it like a detox where, like if you have someone who's like addicted to like a drug or something like that, they don't just like decide the next hour, I'm done with this, and then it's all roses after that. There's a good 3-4 weeks sometimes where they're miserable. Sometimes they're checked into a facility so they can handle it. And, it's not quite that bad for a dietary switch, but, there's definitely like days where you're like, I don't feel as good as I used to. I should scrap this. And I see people giving up after a week or two, and it's like, you got to give it a little more time than that. And then in the same hand, you see some of the common pitfalls, like they lower the carbs, and then they also lower sodium, and it's like you got to really keep a careful eye on those electrolytes when you're going low carb too. Your body just seems to process more, so you need to take in more. And then it's a lifestyle thing too. Like people look at it as like a dietary choice, but there's so many other things that impact it too, like stress, the way you're working out, things like that can negatively impact the way your body processes the fuels you're taking in. So if those things are kind of a mess too, like the diet isn't going to necessarily like fix all of that. So if you're stressing out nonstop, and then you go high fat, low carb, you're not going to see a huge like benefit from it because you're just not in a good, healthy place to begin with. So you get that from time to time too, and it stands to reason in a sport of excess, where it's like the gold standard is to go as far and as long as you can. Like that you're going to have some individuals who are in a chronic state of stress, and they need to also kind of get that figured out or look at it from a holistic approach as along with the dietary thing too, to kind of minimize stress on all areas to really make things work.
I know you're a popular coach, ZachBitter.com. You can find more information, right?
Yeah.
Especially ultra people interested in being fat adapted and lowering that oxidative stress of what they're doing. What are some of if you wanted to offer some quick tips here at the end of the podcast to the average endurance athlete or ultra athlete that's looking to make this transition?
Yeah, I think patience is always key. You have to give it a little bit of time. Like, for me, it was a pretty fast transition, but, still 2 to 4 weeks where things were a little off. So give it that much time and effort. If you're going to do it, give it a good solid month to see where you're at first. And, don't head out trying to like break any records during that time either, because your goal is to keep stress low during that phase. That's going to make that metabolic switch happen a lot quicker. And then just from the general training side of things too, like go easy on your easy days, and save those hard efforts for hard days, specific, well-planned ones that are meant to like move you forward as an athlete, as opposed to just kind of like ending up in that gray area the whole time.
How about sleep? How much do you sleep? Here you're in the middle of your elite career, you're 30 years old, you're in your prime.
Yeah, I think if you would average it out throughout the year, it's probably around 8.5 hours a night or so. There's nights where I'll do hard workouts and I'll sleep 10 hours, and there are days where I'm got something to get to and I'm a little less than that. But I'm pretty sound at around 8.5 to 9 hours. Usually is a good ballpark figure. And I'm a good sleeper, and I think that helps a lot. You can get to bed and stay asleep. It's a big difference than if you're kind of burning the candle on both ends. That goes back to the stress standpoint thing too. Like, you recover, the stress is mitigated to some degree.
So what's up next for you? What are your big season goals here? 2016.
Yeah, I've got. I'm actually doing the Comrades Ultra Marathon in South Africa.
Nice.
And,
all right.
That's the next big one on the list, and then I don't have another event on the schedule until late in the season. So I'm looking to kind of like trickle some things in there, plan a couple more A races for the year after that. I think World 100Ks will probably be for sure at the end of the year, November, December timeframe. But yep, it's always fun there's so many good events now. It's like not too hard to find something.
Zach Bitter, the fat-burning beast, coming alive from the pages of Primal Endurance book. Read all about him in there, and also check out his blog, zachbitter.com. Thanks for spending the time with us, man. I appreciate it. You're really on the forefront of this trend to fat adaptation. Those numbers from the FASTER study were phenomenal. We'll put that in the show notes. You can Google that FASTER study and see what these elites are doing on the cutting edge of being able to burn massive amounts of fat and get away from that long-standing, decades-long carbohydrate dependency that all the endurance athletes have been succumbed to.
Well, thanks for having me on, Brad. It was a blast.
All right. Have a good day. This is your host, Brad Kearns. Thanks for listening to the Primal Endurance Podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode and encourage you to check out the Primal Endurance Mastery course at primalendurance.fit. This is the ultimate online educational experience where you can learn from the world's great coaches and trainers, diet, peak performance, and recovery experts, as well as lengthy one-on-one interviews from several of the greatest endurance athletes of all time, not published anywhere else. It's a major educational experience with hundreds of videos, but you can get free access to a mini course with an ebook summary of the Primal Endurance approach and 9 step-by-step videos on how to become a Primal Endurance athlete. This mini course will help you develop a strong basic understanding of this all-encompassing approach to endurance training that includes primal-aligned eating to escape carbohydrate dependency and enhance fat metabolism, building an aerobic base with comfortably paced workouts, strategically introducing high-intensity strength and sprint workouts, emphasizing rest, recovery, and annual periodization, and finally cultivating an intuitive approach to training instead of the usual robotic approach of fixed weekly workout schedules. Just head over to primalendurance.fit and learn all about the course and how we can help you go faster and preserve your health while you're at it.